Without further ado, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Leah, our speaker today. She is a licensed clinical social worker, a member of our behavioral health team. She started working at Community Health Resource Center a little bit, I think about 2 years ago, and her clinical experience is very diverse. She's worked in hospital emergency departments and psychiatric emergency departments. And she's had extensive case management with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, trauma, and much more. And all of her work leads her to find passion for sharing with other healthcare providers and patients about trauma-informed care. I'll go ahead and let the share her screen again and get started.
All right. Thanks, Twin. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Again, my name is Leah Kramer, and I appreciate you taking the time today to join me as we talk about some wellness habits. I did my first lecture for CHRC a little over a year ago when I presented Promoting Wellness with 3 Habits. And in that presentation, I talked about gratitude, getting out into nature, and mindfulness. And so the inspiration for developing that presentation was in response to really a very difficult and stressful time we were all going through. We were just a year into COVID. We were all hoping that we would be returning to normal by this time, but there are some extremely challenging world events going on that are continuing to pose a great deal of stress, leading to depression and anxiety for all of us. And as a therapist, seeing the impact of these large events, I often encourage my clients to take a step back and focus on what they can control when so much appears to be out of control in this world. And these habits, like the ones I discussed last year, have been shown to be evidence-based to provide positive effects for everyone, not just those who are suffering from depression and anxiety. So there's my introduction slide. What are the habits? Today, we're going to be talking about pro-social behavior, movement, and simplicity. And again, I chose techniques that I felt were fairly simple, completely free, and accessible to everyone. So if we're setting out to create a habit, goal really needs to be realistic, to be achievable if we're going to bother with it. And I believe all of these have that potential. And practicing any of these for a few days may provide happiness in the moment, but to have a lasting, meaningful effect, it's best to try to see how you can work them into your regular routine. And just a reminder, content in this presentation is not meant to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or behavioral health condition. And as I talk about these habits, they should be seen as an adjunct or a complement, not as a replacement for any interventions recommended by your provider. So we're going to start with the first, pro-social behavior, how helping others helps us. And start with a quote. I found this lovely Chinese proverb. If you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing, if that's your thing. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. And if you want happiness for a lifetime, help someone. So let's start with the definition. What is pro-social behavior? So very simply stated, pro-social behaviors are those intended to help other people. These actions are characterized by a concern for the rights, feelings, and welfare of others. So empathy, or the ability to see things from another person's perspective, is a key ingredient here. So on its face, you'd think that the beneficiary of pro-social behaviors would be the recipient of those helpful or kind acts. And we also think that when we're stressed out, we need to help ourselves or circle the wagons around ourselves and we're less inclined to help or engage with others. But the research has shown us that helping others will have a greater effect on our happiness than turning inward. So I found this adorable movie online, which I think provides a very excellent introduction to this topic.
That was a
Thank you.
very nice video. How
Thank
did you
you.
stumble upon that?
Oh, Googling. I was just in YouTube and having a good old time, but I like this movie, and it may was a little bit spotty in the beginning, but we have a man who's very professional and together looking, but he's very obviously very standoffish, and he's got the hands in the pockets, and he's completely disinterested in helping people, even in the simplest of ways, right? And then he has this experience where he's really kind of forced to take care of this elderly woman. And he finds the experience to be very gratifying. And so then he tries to replicate this feeling by seeking out other opportunities to help people. And if you caught it at the end of the movie, he spied and saw another gentleman who reminded him very much of himself. And so he wanted to replicate that process. And so I thought this movie sort of nicely reflects a lot of what we've learned in the research on this topic. Sorry. So it's helpful to think about prosocial behavior as being one of three types. And the first type is helping. And this means assisting others who are having difficulty achieving a goal on their own. So then there's many examples of this that we just saw in that short movie. So a great deal of research has shown that the emotional benefits for the giver, also referred to as the helper's high. So in an exhaustive study from the United Kingdom, 70,000 subjects were asked questions about their volunteering habits and their mental health, which specify their distress and overall functioning. And this study, by the way, took place over several years. So those who had volunteered in the previous year had higher levels of satisfaction and overall health. And it further found that people who volunteered more frequently, meaning at least once a month, reported better mental health than those who volunteered less frequently or not at all. So in viewing the data, it would be easy to surmise, well, maybe happy people are just more likely to want to help others and do some volunteering. However, the researchers accounted for the subject's sense of well-being at the start of the study, and they still got the same results, meaning that people became happier over time when engaging in volunteering. Further, it's shown to have a greater effect or giving a bigger boost to those who started with a lower sense of well-being. So the second type of prosocial behavior is sharing. And this is where one addresses the material need of others. And it requires a recognition that there is an unequal distribution of resources. So this is when we consider making donations of goods or money for charity. And research has shown us that we get a bigger happiness boost when we spend money on others rather than ourselves. You may, reflect on your own experience at a holiday when you're opening a present. It's lovely, but you tend to get an even bigger jolt of happiness when you see someone open a gift that you've given to them. So we know that charitable giving activates the reward center of the brain, meaning it leads to activation of the dopamine reward pathway. So it's basically the same part of the brain that's turned on when we eat a slice of chocolate cake. Assuming again that you like chocolate cake or anything that's particularly pleasurable. And the reward pathway is activated when we receive money, but it's even more activated when we donate that same amount of money. So when we're looking at the brain, it really is better to give than to receive. And we also know that feeling good lasts longer when you're spending money than when you're spending money on yourself. So hedonic adaptation is this idea that when we have a delightful stimulus, repeating that experience over and over again reduces its impact. For example, if you were to go out to a really nice dinner on a Friday night you really enjoy it. But if I sent you there, every night after that, it would still be nice, but not nearly as nice as it was the first night you were there. So we do adapt very quickly to good things. So keeping that in mind, there was a study where a group of subjects were given $5 a day over the course of 5 days to spend on themselves. And another group was given $5 a day over the course of 5 days to spend on others. So the happiness declined very quickly for those who spent the money on themselves, whereas the happiness remained the same level for those who spent it on others. So basically, giving is resistant to that hedonic adaptation. Oopsie daisy, sorry. And finally, we have the third kind is comforting. So this is where we're responding to the emotional needs of others. And this could be helping a child who's crying, a friend who just lost a job, or simply helping your partner process a difficult day. So the two most common ways we offer this emotional support is through acceptance and reappraisal. So acceptance is when we're providing that empathy by providing that person space to be heard, validated, understood. This is what we typically just do for our friends and family, just simply accepting where they are. And then by reappraisal, that's when we're offering feedback, problem solving, or maybe how to view their situation, maybe from a different angle. In therapy, we tend to call this technique reframing. And we have evidence that providing these types of emotional support effectively make us change the way we're thinking about our own problem. So it allows us to have more self-compassion and have flexibility to consider our problems from different angles. So in essence, providing someone else support leads to a reduction of our own stress. Also, we understand that people who suffer from depression are more likely to be focused on themselves. And the act of focusing on others through comforting has been found to result in lower levels of depression, again, thanks to that reappraisal of their own lives. Oopsie daisy, why does this keep happening to? Okay. So one of the great benefits of prosocial behavior is social connection. So we know loneliness epidemic. So the Surgeon General has made the case that it's a public health concern and has found many negative health outcomes can be traced to feeling. And you may have heard this finding that we've learned that loneliness and social isolation can be as damaging to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And this is especially true among retired people who no longer maybe have that natural sort of social outlet. So volunteering is an opportunity to make new friends and increase social skills, since you'd be regularly meeting people with common interests. And it can also provide a sense of agency. So it's a bonus. Important to note, people tend to prefer to interact with people who display prosocial behavior. So prosocial people are more agreeable, honest, humble, and people tend to avoid those who behave selfishly. So it's likely that volunteering will actually make you a magnet for good people. Sorry. So let's talk about some ways to do it. The first is with regards to giving money. So on that sharing front. So I came across this Harvard psychologist by the name of Joshua Green, and he has found that when we consider making donations, we tend to give with our hearts rather than our heads, meaning we identify causes or charities that are closer to our personal experience, such as an organization that fights a disease that maybe took your family member, or an organization in your community where you're seeing the results of their good work, rather than giving it to organizations that are considered to be more effective. And by that, we mean getting more bang for the buck, or maybe helping more people with that money. And so there's this whole group of researchers called effective altruists who are really seeking to try to identify those charities that give you, again, more bang for the buck. So an example that Dr. Green provided was that, it costs $40,000 to train one guide dog for one person with a visual impairment in the United States. And that same amount could pay for 2,000 people in Africa to be cured of blindness with surgeries to reverse the effects of a disease called trachoma. So there's your example about difference between giving with your heart and giving with your head. So research has shown that it's very hard to convince people to abandon these organizations close to their heart with good reason. So they've proposed a great alternative. Dr. Green came up with this website called Giving Multiplier, and it encourages you to give to both charities that have a meaning to you and ones that are more effective. And the more of your proportion you give to an effective charity, the more they provide matching funds. So they're rewarding that behavior of giving to effective charities. There's also organizations called GiveWell, which is another organization that researches the world's most effective charities. So if you're thinking about making donations to charity, I would encourage you to check out these websites. And then I also wanted to recommend this wonderful website called Volunteer Match. Hopefully I can get this to work. It is a website that I located actually when I first moved to San Francisco, and I was looking for a way to use my time before I had found a job, and I didn't know very many people. So if you go to this website, you can identify that right now, there's over 240,000 volunteer opportunities in San Francisco. That is too many to sift through. So they have all of these filters, including cause areas. So if you have an interest, say, in homelessness or housing, or children and youth, you can click on those. And it also allows you to identify maybe what skills that you would bring to this, say, if you have experience with engineering or arts or human resources, there's always a place and a need for your skills. Now we're on to the second habit, which is movement, or how staying active is not just good for our bodies. So it is okay, I'm going to do my quote here for you too. Here. Exercise is labor without weariness. Okay, so yes, it's no surprise that exercise is good for you. This is news to absolutely no one here today. We know that regular exercise reduces your risk for heart disease, stroke, and diabetes, and as well as countless other medical conditions. But if something is good for your heart, we also know that it is good for your brain. Put simply, when we move our bodies, blood pressure and blood flow increase everywhere in the body, including the brain. And more blood means more energy and oxygen, which improves brain performance.
That's just for those fitness freaks down at the gym. An intellectual like yourself has no need for such mindless activities. Right? Wrong. While the brain is not a muscle, it benefits from regular physical exercise, with improved mood and cognitive health. Scientists studying mice have revealed amazing connections between exercise and brain health. Regular exercise triggers the growth of new blood vessels in the brain, allowing the brain to receive a larger blood supply. It spurs the creation of new neurons in the brain's memory center, the hippocampus. It even boosts levels of molecules that nourish neurons. Simply put, exercise leads to mice with more, better-fed, healthier neurons. Studies in older adults show that regular aerobic exercise can improve cognitive function and slow cognitive decline. So, if you want to remember the color of your first car when you're 80 years old, you might consider starting and maintaining a healthy workout regimen now. But you don't need to wait until you're 80 to reap the brain benefits of exercise. Regular exercise can improve mood and reduce the symptoms of anxiety and depression. It can even make you more resilient to stress. So the next time you see those running shoes gathering dust in your closet and consider lacing up, just remember, your muscles aren't the only things getting stronger.
Thank you. So the video talked a little bit about the brain and these neurons and the hippocampus. And one thing I wanted to share, there's this wonderful protein called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And those are proteins that support neurons and stimulate the growth of neurons. And I'm actually going to go to the next slide.
Oh,
So
I think
okay.
there we are.
Yeah. So, and we know that these neurons seem to do most of the work in the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain most strongly associated with learning, memory, and recall. And there are numerous ways we can work to increase the BDNF, which our brains so badly need, but it's been found that the most effective way is to do exercise. And the two types of exercise include aerobic exercise and resistance training. And several studies have shown that it takes about 6 months to start reaping the cognitive benefits of exercise. So with regards to exercise and aging, if you're not a senior, you are headed there eventually. So it's important to know that the downside here is that BDNF decreases with age. And we know that people diagnosed with Alzheimer's and dementia have severely low BDNF. The research shown that having that high levels can lower your risk of developing these illnesses. So according to a study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, walking or running as little as 15.3 miles per week can reduce your risk of developing Alzheimer's by about 40%. So I found this to be particularly motivating. And of particular interest, I found a study from the American Geriatric Society that found that Tai Chi, as a form of exercise, has potential to enhance cognitive functioning in seniors, particularly around planning, memory, attention, and problem solving. So why Tai Chi? Apparently it's because its slow movements require learning and memorizing movement patterns. So if you're trying to figure out where you want to go with this exercise routine that you're going to get going, you may want to consider Tai Chi. So with regards to mental health, there's been numerous studies that have found that people with exercise or otherwise, people who exercise or are otherwise active are typically less prone to depression and anxiety than sedentary people. So again, with regard to my own therapy clients with anxiety or depression, I regularly ask them about their activity level and encourage them to develop some form of regular exercise, even if it's simply taking short walks. So with regards to depression, and back to the neuroscience, so exercise increases feel-good transmitters, serotonin and dopamine. And we know that exercise provides a jolt to the reward centers of the brain, much like we discussed previously with the discussion on the prosocial behavior. So when we exercise, we get a rush of dopamine. And if you engage in regular habit of exercise, your brain will have more available dopamine and dopamine receptors, having the effect of decreasing depression and expanding your capacity for joy. So we also know that exercise pumps more blood and oxygen into the brain, giving us more energy. And that's to counteract the symptom of depression, which is low energy and motivation. And it also promotes brain plasticity by helping create new connections in the brain, which regulate your emotions, personality, and how you think and perceive the outside world. So with regards to anxiety, it makes fight and flight less reactive. So I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of fight or flight. So it's our body's automatic response to a perceived threat, which causes us to feel anxious. So it's your body's attempt to protect you. The body's sympathetic nervous system will kick in, preparing you to react to a threat. And this means that you have increased heart rate, rapid breathing, muscle tension, and it generally feels pretty awful because it's a negative stressor. So exercise also produces increased heart rate and more rapid breathing. But while exhausting and sometimes pretty uncomfortable if we're really pushing ourselves, psychologically, we don't feel that sense of danger. So it's a positive stressor. So exercise can help rewire our brains to not overreact to threats in the future. So when you're stressed, consider that time maybe to do a workout to transition your brain's interpretation of that negative stressor and turn it into a positive one. So here's another example of why it's important to be consistent. The more you do it, the more your brain becomes able to manage stress. It also provides us really a form of almost meditation. So you may have noticed that when you exercise, it has the effect of clearing your mind. So when your body is busy, your mind tends to get distracted from worries and you're better able to be in the present and think creatively. And finally, another bonus, we know that exercise reduces muscle tension and stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline. So how much do we really need to exercise? So according to the American Heart Association, it's 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity. And moderate intensity is considered going on a brisk walk. So that could come out to basically 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And you may have heard this number sort of thrown around by your doctor or from other sources. So you see at the bottom there, I put not always realistic, because if you're a sedentary person, this may be way too big of a jump for you to make. So it's important to really identify your fitness goals and start at a place that is, again, more realistic. But we know that even a little bit of exercise helps. So, this recommendation is out there that we know that people who exercise even once a week, or maybe 10 minutes a day instead of 30, they tend to be, research has shown those people tend to be more cheerful. So any amount of exercise can be helpful. But here are some tips for engaging in exercise. Number one, start small and slow. So if you don't have to lift heavy weights or, train for a marathon, that doesn't need to be your goal. You need to start in a way that feels right for your body. And you may want to consult your physician before starting a particular exercise program. Number two, strive for balance. So if you do, one activity only, you're more likely to get burnt out or injured. So if you're inclined to do biking classes, you may want to consider yoga or dance or, whatever feels right to you. And again, you really need to do something you enjoy, right? If you don't like jogging, don't jog. If you're not going to get that sense of enjoyment out of it, you're less likely to stay with it. So number three, everything counts. So consider many things as exercise. I park about a half mile away from my office and it's uphill, and you can bet that I consider that part of my exercise routine. Other things such as chores or gardening, they all count. And you may notice that I called this section movement rather than exercise, because all these forms of movement they contribute to the same effect. So number four, celebrate achievements. One strategy that has been found to be very effective in terms of staying with an exercise routine is to pair your exercise with something that actually feels like a reward. So for example, maybe you have a podcast that you are very addicted to that you want to sort of binge on. That would be something good to pair with, taking it on a walk or being on an exercise machine. Or maybe it's going out with a friend or having a nice meal or a bath, whatever works for you to reinforce that habit. Number five, consider exercising with friends. You're going to get an immediate sense of support, and it's just going to be a lot more fun if you can swing it. And number six, bonus points added for going outside. So if you saw my last presentation, I spoke about the benefits of being out in nature. There's numerous health and mental health benefits to being outdoors and being in nature. So if you're exercising outside, you're going to just multiply those positive effects. So my go-to for exercise is I have one of those Peloton bikes, and I love it because of the music and the instructors. So they provide encouragement and sometimes distraction in really difficult workouts. One thing they really try to do is they help to rewire our brains a little bit when it comes to how we approach exercise. So one class, I was particularly appreciative of this statement. So work out because you love your body, not because you hate it. So, and I wanted to credit the instructor, but I looked on the internet and apparently this quote is very widely used. So often we focus on what we want to change about our bodies, particularly around weight loss. And that can be a very unhelpful and unhealthy attitude towards any kind of exercise program. So if you pause and reflect, you can recognize really how much joy our bodies bring us in terms of what they've done for us, where they've taken us, and the experiences they've allowed us to have. So, I may recommend taking more of an attitude of gratitude as a more helpful mind frame when you're thinking about doing exercise. So now on to the third and final, which is simplicity. And I found this quote: simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. So in today's society, we are bombarded with messages to the opposite effect, that through having endless choices, acquiring things, and remaining busy, we're offered some form of achievement or freedom. But research on the concepts of simplicity and minimalism have found that they are actually more highly correlated with happiness. And I found this habit to be a little bit harder to define than the other strategies on my list, as simplicity can mean many things to everyone. Everyone may have a different idea of what simplicity actually means. So I'm going to outline the benefits of replacing excess in our lives and focusing really on what reflects our values. So the first topic I'm going to talk about is how we are exposed to too many choices. So you may find on a given evening, you're sitting in front of your television, you put on Netflix, and you're scrolling through endless pages or choices of movies or TV shows. And the next thing you know, a half hour has gone by and you're like, about your eventual choice. You're not terribly excited about it. So you may have been suffering from something called choice overload or analysis paralysis. And there's this researcher and author by the name of Barry Schwartz, and he has lectured on this topic and wrote a book called Paradox of Choice. And he has found that we are actually happier with fewer choices. And the more options we have, the less satisfied we are with that choice. So you'll see in the graph that the green goes up. We do like choices. We actually do, like choices. And this is something that, over history, we have been given more choices. If we're told that we could only have one choice for a meal or a car or where to go to college, we'd probably be pretty unhappy. So we do like choice. And you see that green line goes up, but there is a point at which there is no longer return on investment. And in fact, it starts to go in the other direction. It makes us more unhappy. So the study that's most frequently cited in this discussion was conducted by researchers at Columbia University. And they set up stations in a grocery store on alternate days. One day they would have a station with 6 jams, and on another day they would have 24 jams. Both conditions had coupons for purchase. And what they found was, while more people tended to go to the station with 24 jams, you think, oh, more choices. This is really interesting. It was actually the station with 6 jams sold 10 times more product. And this research has been replicated many times with chocolate, speed dating, you name it. And the conclusion is always the same, that too many choices leads to stress, anxiety, bad decisions, and depression. So the negative consequences of having too many choices are, again, decision paralysis, where we have a really hard time making a decision. Having to make too many decisions lead to worse decisions going forward. and also that fear that we didn't make the right choice, or having that sense of regret. And another example of how this can be harmful, it's been found that when people are presented with a decision to make a choice among 401k plans provided by their employer, the more options that are provided, the less likely people are even going to bother with it. And so this can have a very negative consequence, obviously, if people are not participating. So Dr. Schwartz talked about two different decision-making styles. The first is maximizers, and the second is satisficers. So maximizers sift through several choices and they labor over making the perfect decision. So they like having a lot of choices and trying to make sure they're doing all the research to get it right. These type of decision makers tend to have higher levels of regret. They're also more prone to social comparison, measuring themselves against others. And this often leads to envy, and it just tends to make them miserable. And the second type of person, or the second type of person he described, are satisficers. And so satisficers, they tend to be satisfied with good enough. And they tend to be happier and experience less regret. You would like to be a satisficer. Obviously, if you have a very important decision to make, you are going to want to be a little bit more focused on getting it right and getting it perfect. But for lower stakes decisions, you might want to consider being a satisficer. So what does that mean? Or what are the steps to get that accomplished? First, you outline what you need. Second, you choose the first option that meets your needs. And third, once the decision is made, you focus on the positive attributes of your choice. So a great example of this, again, provided by Dr. Schwartz, is he goes out to a restaurant, and instead of opening the menu and getting overwhelmed by choice, closes the menu and just waits for everybody else at the table to share what they are ordering for dinner, and then picks his favorite among that group. You've also seen, Steve Jobs decided he makes too many decisions in a day. So he made a very careful calculation that his clothes don't matter that much. And so he basically wore the same outfit every day, and that made him much happier. So thinking like a satisficer can also help you to think about reducing the amount of things in your life. So minimalists are those who seek to pare down the number of possessions. They seek to have those possessions reflect their values. So rather than having some perceived standards that somebody else has set. A great example of this in pop culture is, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Marie Kondo. And she is this also author. She's had a television show, and she's very famous for going into people's homes and helping them to simplify and clear a lot of their stuff out and organize. And the framing that she uses with her clients is to identify an object and see if it sparks joy. If it doesn't spark joy, meaning it doesn't have meaning, it doesn't have relevance, it's not something that is important to you, and you acknowledge it, and then you basically sort of move it out of your house. And that really aligns with this idea of that minimalist embrace, which is that for you to hold on to materials, they really need to reflect your values. Because stuff tends to stress us out and it steals our attention, and decluttering our environment helps us to also declutter our minds and give us more time and energy back. So, and examples could also be reducing your wardrobe. That's why I'm showing you a closet here. So there is an author named Courtney Carver, and she wrote a book called Project 333 about her choices to simplify her life. And she implemented something she called the 333 challenge, where she limited herself to 33 items of clothing for 3 months. And she found herself feeling less stressed and overwhelmed, and it bought her obviously a lot more time. And so taking on a minimalist mindset may just simply start with clearing out clutter in your life. getting rid of duplicates. It doesn't have to be extreme. So what are some of those benefits of embracing simplicity? Well, for one, it's healthier. We know that fewer things means fewer problems and less stress. And of course, stress leads to hypertension, diabetes, and depression. So anything we can do to minimize our stress is a good thing. Number two, it allows you to enjoy smaller things. There's so many simple pleasures that can get lost when we get distracted. Number three, it enhances gratitude. And that's what I talked about in my last presentation, the importance of gratitude. If you live with less, it allows you to see what's important and feel gratitude for what you actually have. And finally, it leads to deeper social connections. So it eliminates distractions again and allows you to focus on relationships. And finally, setting boundaries with your time. So we've talked about eliminating choice, eliminating things, and now we need to talk about setting boundaries with our time, or it's okay to say no. So COVID, in a strange way, did simplify our lives and activities. We no longer had as many obligations, both professional and personal. And now that life is opening up again, it's wise to consider how not to fall in the trap of overextending ourselves. So just like having possessions reflect our values, we also should consider applying that same logic to how we use our time. You want to make sure that it's, again, reflecting your values and that you're getting your needs met. So when we make our own decisions about how we use our time, we're also we get to make those decisions, but we're also socialized to be people pleasers. So this is where a lot of people feel some tension. But it's important to note that setting these types of boundaries, setting clear limits with others about what we will and won't do, actually have the effect of strengthening those relationships. They're good for the people around you as well as yourself. So some of those benefits, again, for being able to say no is that it helps build self-esteem, helps you to identify your identity and values, it promotes independence, and helps you to avoid burnout. Now, obviously in our jobs, in our day-to-day lives, we can't say no all the time. We have responsibilities. We want to be team players, but it's really important to recognize, where you're starting to suffer when you're feeling overextended. So it's important to just be very mindful of learning to set those limits. I found this one online, and I love this young lady's message, and I think it's a good way to give us all a little bit of a pep talk.
A crucial part of self-care is setting aside time for yourself. That's why it's so important to be able to say no to friends, family, school, work, and other things that probably weigh you down. So maybe you need to practice a bit. No, 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 no. There you go. And actually, you should probably look up the song Mariah Carey made where she says no 95 times. 95 times she says no. Do you think she got her point across? It's amazing. Look it up. So doing all of this, saying no, really gives us space to relax and decompress. In this video, we're going to share with you a few ways to politely say no without it disrupting your life. Part 1. How to say no. Say it early. The longer you wait to express your boundaries, the more uncomfortable it becomes for the person who's asking you to do something. Whether you need more time on an assignment or you can't make it to lunch with a friend, make sure you say no as soon as possible. Be honest. People will respect you when you set boundaries for yourself. And that starts with saying no to things you can't do or things you need more time to prepare for. If the pandemic has shown us one thing, it's that taking time for yourself is absolutely necessary. And it's not a reflection of you or a personal failure. Suggest an alternative. You could offer a different time or suggest a different activity to do that's more in line with your interests. If you'd like to say no for something that your teacher or your manager needs, maybe you should suggest an extended deadline. It's also great if you can suggest alternative ways to get your needs met and so that your teacher or manager gets their needs met. It's even better if you can come to that conversation with an alternative. Part 2, why saying no is important. If you're overextending yourself, saying no is the best way to regain control over your life. Saying yes to everything can lead to burnout. And if you're burned out, you can't be the best friend, get the best grades, or do the best work. I'm a former yes woman, and let me tell you, it was an exhausting life to live. And my life has been so much more balanced since I've learned to say no sometimes. You gain confidence when you start saying no. The first time is the hardest, but the more you do it, the easier it is. I actually really enjoy saying no because each time I do, I feel like I get to take some of my power back. You deserve time for yourself, and saying no is often an expression of self-love. I know that's how I feel. As things are opening back up, you might not feel comfortable hanging out with friends and family or being outside. This is completely normal, and you should feel comfortable asking for patience. When it comes to social obligations, you don't really have to have a reason why you don't want to do it. No is the reason. And if you really would like some more self-care tips, make sure you go to getschool.com.
All right.
I really liked that.
Oh yeah. She did it much better than I could. So that's the conclusion of this presentation. So happy to answer any questions as they come.
Awesome. So we have 3 questions. First question is, other than proper nutrition and meditation, what small habits are easy to adopt? And I think that you gave us 3 habits. And 2 years ago, you gave us 3 habits initially, and I'm happy to link that video.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear from other people. I mean, I've done research on 6 of these, so it's sort of hard for me to come up with one on the fly, but I think the key is it's helpful to learn about why they're helpful and then just adopt something that is realistic and easy for you. So, like I, talked about, exercise and, meditation and other practices. And it can be kind of hard. It can be really difficult and disconcerting and you don't want to be disappointed in yourself. So the whole key to any of these wellness practices is to start small. And hopefully with a little bit of repetition, you start to see the benefits and then it becomes self-reinforcing.
Our next question is, how best to promote wellness when one is struggling daily with anxiety, depression, and feelings of social disconnectedness?
Yeah, whoever posed that question, you're absolutely not alone. And like I said, the pandemic has really heightened, I think, everybody's sense of isolation and stress, and that can manifest itself as depression or anxiety. So I think, again, it's very tempting, again, to circle the wagons and go inward. But one of the strongest recommendations I have is to open that up to other people, making connections in your life in a way that is manageable. And, try these practices. I think, again, getting outside and moving, focusing on diet. And then, if you're finding that, with these smaller interventions that you're still feeling, like you're struggling, I want to completely normalize therapy. I think it's something that everybody should do at some point. And I think it can really, allow you to process what's going on in your head and your life and, adopt some new behavioral strategies that should, result in a decrease of these troubling symptoms.
I'd really like to second that. We should normalize therapy. Last question from the registration. How can parents help their young adult children who are dealing with anxiety and depression due to the pandemics? I think, jumping on your previous question, this is more towards children, youth.
Yeah, a good question. I mean, I think in some ways, kids today are more socialized to be able to talk about this in a way maybe that adults aren't. And so just checking in with them regularly to see how they're managing their day-to-day. I think the schools are doing their best to address a lot of these sort of social effects that have resulted from the pandemic. And yeah, encourage maybe reach out to your child's school to see, from their perspective, what is most helpful. Depending on the age of your kids, I think that could be, really helpful to learn, what is appropriate for this age group. And again, if your child is really struggling, again, normalize the idea of them speaking with a professional. But for the day-to-day stuff, I just open a dialogue with your kids, see what they need.
I have another question that came in.
Yeah.
How do you make closer and more meaningful connections while not having any family or close friends? This person understands there's volunteering, but are there other suggestions because it causes anxiety and almost panic attacks due to severe isolation?
Yeah, yeah, and that's the thing is that the more you isolate, the more anxious you become. And so when we think about anxiety, we think of it as a wheel. And if you do anything to avoid what makes you anxious, it may give you sort of temporary relief in the moment, but it actually will build your anxiety more. So the more you isolate, the harder it is really to engage socially. And so again, I think this is where we sort of take the principle of starting small. I think it's important to note that everything counts again. So even getting out of your house and, doing shopping, just being on the street and sort of, being in public can be one way to start. And I think there are other organizations out there that give you sort of social opportunities. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. I don't know if you know this, Twin. Where there are groups online with people with similar interests that you can meet up with. So yeah, there are groups that meet up with common interests or demographics. It could be with your dog, or it could be people who are interested in music or something something more specific along those lines. And so it does require a little bit of effort and being proactive to sort of seek out those opportunities. I know those can be a little bit frightening, but there are certainly ways to create community and meet new people, even if you are otherwise isolated and find yourself separated from family.
Our attendee who asked that question actually knew the platform you were talking about. It's called meetup.com.
That's what it is.
Yeah, it's spelled exactly like you would hear it, meetup.com. I have another participant who chat and gave us this response. You can get out and enjoy music and the arts. Chatting with people at concerts is easy. Adult education classes such as these,
There you go.
either in person. There are community living campaigns such as Unlock Senior Services. Their organization is located in San Francisco, and their services such as health education and group classes for Tai Chi, for example, they are for free, and we tend to have them on our website's calendar. Thank you for sharing the resources and information, Daniel. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Leah. You did a fantastic part 2. I didn't think that there could be more helpful tips than the ones you gave us initially, but I loved the videos you shared, and I thought that they were really great in conveying the more scholarly topics you talked about.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And if anyone has any ideas for future topics, please share. Always looking for new things to study.
Michael would like to say that you're amazing.
Michael, thank you so much. You just made my day.